Yang Mr. Alizan Mahadi, Chief Executive, ISIS Malaysia, Ms. Joan Bala, Government Affairs and Policy Lead, Google Malaysia, Mr. Alizan Mahadi, Senior Director of Research, ISIS Malaysia, Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to ISIS Malaysia. Today, ISIS Malaysia, supported by Google and in conjunction with MyDigital Month, is launching our report titled Strengthening Digital Trade and Digitalization in Malaysia, Challenges and Pathways Towards a Resilient Digital Economy post-COVID-19. This report covers topics related to digital trade, e-commerce, and the digitalizations of small and medium enterprises in Malaysia. This launch event consists of short presentation, followed by our panel discussion. Without further ado, we would like to have an honor to invite Yang Usaha, Mr. Alizan Mahadi, Chief Executive of ISIS Malaysia, to deliver his welcoming remarks and to officiate this event.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera and good afternoon to everyone, especially my colleagues and everyone who's attending this event physically at ISIS as well as virtually. On behalf of Malaysia, I'm most delighted to warmly welcome all of you at the Nordin Sophie Gallery at ISIS Malaysia for today's event. The launch of an ISIS Google report titled Strengthening Digital Trade and Digitalization in Malaysia, Challenges and Pathways Towards a Resilient Digital Economy post-COVID-19. This launch event today is held in conjunction with MyDigital Month, held to commemorate the anniversary of the MyDigital Blueprint launched last year somewhere in February 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, the digital economy and digitalization have certainly become somewhat of a buzzword in policy circles over the past decade. Yet it is easy to forget that popularity of discussions surrounding digitalization has a very compelling underlying reason. It is perhaps the most important driver of innovation, productivity, and growth for firms as well as for our nation's economy as a whole. Catalyzed by the COVID-19, the globalization of digitalization means there is an increasingly urgent need for us to address the various obstacles we face to harnessing the forces of technology for the well-being of Malaysian households, firms, and workers. Now more than ever, as we move our focus towards recovery and growth, and shifts gears into thinking once again about the high-income economy we aspire to be in the near future. To this end, this digital trade report, a collaboration between ISIS and Google, aims to take stock of the major issues in Malaysia's digital economy, as well as explore recent developments in digital policies amid the onset of the pandemic. The report explores the major regulatory and policy barriers to strengthening the digital economy and digital trade across dimensions like e-commerce, the digitalization of small and medium enterprises, and the digital payments ecosystem. Additionally, the report looks at governance and regulatory challenges to Malaysia's digital economy, including on cross-border data flows, data protection, and consumer protections. It is my hope that the launch of this report this afternoon, along with the panel of distinguished speakers we have, will produce fruitful and stimulating discussions about the important issues related to COVID-19, digitalization, and the direction of Malaysia's growth in the coming decade. On behalf of ISIS Malaysia, I would like to take this opportunity to extend our sincere appreciation to our distinguished speakers for making the time to share your insights with us today. I'd also like to thank Google for collaborating with us, without which we will not have this event this morning. Lastly, but definitely nevertheless, I'd like to thank all of you for being with us this afternoon. And I look forward to engaging with all of you in the discussions to come. I hope the conversation that you will have today will help in thinking about how do we move forward, how do we build a better and more resilient digital economy in Malaysia. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Mr. Harizan Hazri. This marks the official launching the report titled Strengthening Digital Trade and Digitalization in Malaysia, Challenges and Pathways Towards a Resilient Digital Economy Post-COVID-19. Now we are pleased to invite Ms. Joan Bala, Government Affairs and Policy Lead, Google Malaysia, to deliver her welcoming remarks, which has been recorded earlier.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joanne, the Government Affairs Lead for Google Malaysia. Thank you so much for joining us today at the ISIS Google Report launch on Malaysia's digital economy. Google is glad to have been able to partner with ISIS to launch this timely report on strengthening the digital trade and digitalization in Malaysia, focusing specifically on the challenges and pathways towards a resilient digital economy post-COVID-19. COVID-19 has been unprecedented in so many ways, in its breadth in affecting the entire region, in its depth given the scale of the economic and social impact it has had in all our lives, and in its transformative power in the way it will change the way we live and work for years to come. However, as countries around the world look to open up and to living in this new normal, it is important and relevant that we talk about how to ensure that our economy, particularly our digital economy, is resilient in the face of any future challenges. In the 6th edition of the Economy C report by Google, Temasek and Bain & Company, it reported that Malaysia's overall internet economy is expected to reach $35 billion by 2025, growing at a CAGR of 14%. Despite this strong growth, it is important, however, that we ensure that we strengthen and continue to support our digital economy ecosystem, as will be highlighted in today's report. I wanted to use this opportunity to highlight 2 areas in particular that I think we should focus on in Malaysia. Firstly, the digitalization of SMEs. Secondly, digital trade. Digital tools have been critical in helping businesses, especially SMBs, survive during the pandemic. In Malaysia, 1 in 3 digital merchants believes that they would not have survived COVID-19 if not for digital platforms. And in the next 5 years, 8 in 10 of them, so 80%, anticipate that more than 50% of their sales will come from online sources. Therefore, it's important that we ensure both the private sector and the public sector come together to provide SMEs with the tools they require to help them with their digital transformation. At Google, one such program that we initiated is Mahir Digital Bersama Google. It's a Grow with Google program, and this platform provides people with free access to training courses, tools, products, and face-to-face coaching to help them get the right skills to embrace new opportunities ahead, such as growing their business, developing ideas, finding jobs, or even advancing in their careers. And in Malaysia alone, we trained over 36,000 SMEs in digital skills. One great example that I would like to highlight today is Lampu Cerita. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced several Malaysians, including Muhammad Zaid, to consider alternative income streams to support their families. In order to do this, Zaid decided to develop his passion into a business by selling natural soy wax candles infused with scented oils under his brand Lampu Cerita. Word of mouth alone, however, caused him to struggle with scaling his business, and so Zaid decided to try digital marketing. And to do this, he attended Mahir Digital Bersama Google, a Grow with Google program that I just mentioned, and with a budget of just $4 per day. He shared Lampu Cerita's latest promotion with a much larger pool of potential customers on Google search. By taking advantage of the digital tools, and Lampu Cerita managed to grow significantly both within Malaysia and overseas. So within that month, Lampu Cerita actually increased website traffic by 350% and its sales by over 70%. And I hope that many more companies can endeavour to follow in Zayed's footsteps. And I hope that we can continue to support Malaysian SMEs in their growth, both within Malaysia and globally. Next, I want to talk a little bit about digital trade. At Google, we believe that digital trade can be the next engine of growth for Asia Pacific as internet access and digital services keep expanding. APEC sits at the heart of the global digital economy. With 2.5 billion internet users online, Asia is shaping global technology, driving many of the biggest technology trends, from payments to e-commerce to on-demand delivery. At the broader economic level, digital trade also supports economic recovery and adds resilience to APEC economies by diversifying markets and enabling them to weather future shocks. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated the value of digital trade and technology in providing for continuity and connectivity. Fundamentally, we believe that APEC governments have an important opportunity to take a leading role in this space to build inclusive, open, and interoperable digital trade agreements. It is a real opportunity to set strong standards for years to come and to build in commitments that will ensure more people and more workers are benefiting from digital trade globally. To this end, we're very encouraged to see the Malaysian government ratify RCEP and that it will enter into force in Malaysia in just a few weeks on 18th of March. However, we understand also that digital trade agreements alone are not sufficient, and they must also be supported by multi-stakeholder efforts to help people get online and to equip them with the right skills and knowledge to engage in digital trade. As Google, we look forward to supporting Malaysia in skilling Malaysians to take advantage of these opportunities available to them. And with that, I look forward to the sharing by the ISIS team today. I trust that their findings on how to build a resilient digital economy for Malaysia will be insightful for all of us. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, Ms. Joanne, for her pre-recorded welcoming remarks. For the next agenda, we would like to invite Mr. Kelvin Cheng, Senior Analyst of ISIS Malaysia, for his presentations on the findings.
Sujatra. Very good afternoon. Thank you to our physical and virtual attendees for making the time to be here today. Today, I'll be presenting a very brief summary report, which is a result of a collaboration between ISIS Malaysia and Google, launched in conjunction with MyDigital Month. The report is titled Strengthening Digital Trade and Digitalization in Malaysia. A bit of background, this report was completed in October 2021, and the full report has 4 major sections: digital trade, digitalization of MSMEs, digital payments, and digital trade regulations and governance. But today, in the interest of time, we will only be presenting on the first 3. This report was commissioned to explore the issues and challenges concerning digital policy in the COVID age. Let me take this opportunity to say that we greatly appreciate the many stakeholders we have interviewed during the 3 months this report was written. Without further ado, let's start. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the first section is on digital trade and e-commerce. Next slide. Digital trade refers to trade in goods and services that are enabled by digital technologies. This includes e-commerce, of course, Lazada, Shopee, but also buying apps through app stores or platforms. And we've long known that digital trade and e-commerce is becoming an increasingly important part of Malaysia's economy. In Malaysia, the contribution of e-commerce to GDP has grown tremendously, from just 8% in 2015 to nearly 12% in 2020, with e-commerce contributing an estimated 163 billion ringgit in 2020. That's almost as much as the entire economy of Cambodia and Laos combined, right? So in the coming years, projections suggest that this figure is anticipated to grow even further, exponentially, accelerated in large part by the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, Google's latest 2021 Economy C report projects that the gross merchandise value of digital trade will grow at a constant annual rate of about 8 to 14% every single year from 2021 to 2025. Next slide, please. The digitalization of trade flows brings about wide-ranging benefits to many stakeholders. For one, it increases the amount of trade we do with each other through lower trade costs, lower search costs, and the facilitation of global value chains. But two, it also benefits small businesses and MSMEs through greater diffusion of technology and creating opportunities for firms to integrate into global value chains much faster and more cheaply compared to traditional analog trade channels. Three, it benefits consumers like you and me. Online platforms make it quicker, cheaper, and easier for us to access a wider range of products from across the country and across the world. Next slide, please. Nonetheless, despite its myriad benefits, there are numerous impediments to the expansion of digitally enabled trade in Malaysia. This can be separated into obstacles related to digital enablers, meaning infrastructure, regulations, and standards, as well as digital actors, that is, firms and consumers. Next slide, please. So let's quickly explore some of these obstacles. First, it's well known that Malaysia's logistics performance has declined over the past few years, both based on old data, including this old 2018 Logistics Performance Index chart, but also according to our stakeholder interviews with numerous experts across 2020. Data shows that the quality of Malaysia's logistics infrastructure has declined significantly since 2014 relative to other countries in the region. This is especially serious in areas like customs, tracking and tracing, and timeliness. And these logistics gaps relate to both traditional logistics infrastructure, like roads, rails, and ports, but also to digital infrastructure, such as affordable high-speed internet access. For logistics infrastructure, our stakeholder interviews indicate that problems include simple, long-standing issues like traffic congestion, road failure, and inadequate last-mile connectivity, both road and rail, in and around key transport hubs like Port Klang and Penang. There are also more complex issues like low digitalization across the logistics supply chain and inefficient customs clearance processes. Engagement with logistics firms operating in Port Klang indicates that the speed and efficiency of customs and port services are still lacking. Stakeholders describe customs clearance processes as being only partially digitalized. Once shipments are cleared through the customs information system, forwarding agents still have to deliver hard copy documents to customs agents by hand, right, physically, for verification. Yet, besides logistical problems, digital trade can also be stifled by digital restrictions. So digital trade relies on digital networks and data flows, and as such, restrictions at any one node of the process can have large impacts and impede transactions across the supply chain. So Malaysia currently ranks in the top 11 most restrictive countries towards digital trade, according to the Digital Trade Restrictiveness Index. This is higher than the global median and much higher than regional peers like Philippines and Singapore. This is due mainly to Malaysia's regulatory barriers related to the lack of competition in the telecommunications industry, limited commitments on basic telecommunication services under the General Agreement on Trade in Services, GATS. And additionally, Malaysia also has data restrictions, content access constraints, along with Malaysia's use of import-export restrictions like import licensing schemes, all of which potentially dampen digital trade growth. Next slide, please. Now, moving on now to from digital trade to the digitalization of MSMEs. Digital technologies benefit firms and small businesses in many different areas. This encompasses different technologies and business processes, from the use of e-commerce and digital marketing also from the front end to the back end of the supply chain, and also for different business processes. A large body of international evidence from Kenya to Indonesia indicates that firms who adopt digital technologies are more productive, more efficient, and more profitable. Over the past 2 years, digital technologies on the front end have allowed businesses to reach customers, maintain supplier relationships, and market their products and services even as lockdowns progress in many parts of the world. And on the back end, technologies make it more convenient for firms to access financing, such as via peer-to-peer lending, digital banking, and also to recruit workers more easily. But of course, numerous obstacles remain in driving digital adoption amongst MSMEs. Of course, when I mention MSMEs, I really mean mostly the micro and small enterprises, not as opposed to the medium-sized firms. So among these obstacles are access to digital infrastructure, awareness and skills deficits, financing constraints, the impact of COVID-19, as well as gender-related issues. Next slide. So let's take a quick look at some of these. So firstly, we know that Malaysian businesses lag far behind the level of adoption of OECD countries, as well as even businesses in other lower middle income countries in ASEAN, like Thailand, Vietnam, and the Philippines. 2019 surveys suggest that only 62% of Malaysian firms are connected to the internet, while only 15% use online platforms to export their products internationally. Moreover, it has been long known that access to digital infrastructure varies greatly across states. Major urban centers like KL have broadband penetration rates closer to 71%, while lesser developed states in Kelantan and Sabah have very low penetration rates of only about 18 and 15% respectively. Beyond access, speed matters as well, and this has been long known. In 2019, the broadband demand survey conducted by MCMC shows that 41% of businesses reported that the internet speed was insufficient for their technological needs. Next slide. Beyond that, another obstacle is awareness and skills deficits. Awareness, skills, and digitalization exist on a continuum. Interviews with policymakers suggest that this can range from MSMEs who are completely unaware of digitalization, to those who are aware but lack the ability to apply for government programs, to SMEs who have managed to digitalize small portions of their operations, which are usually front-end processes, but lack the capacity or knowledge to go further. Many smaller micro-enterprises managed by older individuals, of course, they lack technological skills and digital literacy. Policymakers working on the ground reveal that many do not even have the ability to search and apply for government digitalization or aid programs online because they're unable to use simple tools like that you and I take for granted, things like Google, right, or YouTube to find information. And these awareness and skills gaps may be worsened by the overlapping, duplicative, and fragmented government agencies and digitalization programs at both the federal and state levels. And further down the digital knowledge continuum, engagement with MSMEs show that even when policymakers provide infrastructure and digital service providers for MSMEs, there are often significant knowledge gaps to ensure that the digital adoption is sustainable without external assistance in the long term. And next is financing and cost, right? So this is a common issue. And despite the large amount of government programs available, a large percentage of firms still cite funding as a key obstacle to digitalization. This is especially true for smaller enterprises and are compounded by awareness gaps, as mentioned before. And there's also the COVID dimension. Experience with small firms reveals that many hardest hit enterprises failed to pay their bills amid the onset of the pandemic in 2020, and have since been blacklisted by credit reporting agencies like CTOS. And this creates additional barriers for firms, hindering their ability to access telecommunications or internet services, or even government assistance. And notably, one final area that's overlooked in the cost dimension is recurring digital-related costs. For example, one MSME in the accommodation sector told us that the commission costs of platform sites are rising fast. Sites like Agoda charges up to a 17% commission rate, while GrabFood charges about a 30% commission rate. And similarly, experts have told us that digital marketing costs have also risen as demand has risen. Services like digital keyword advertising, they used to cost 4 cents just 2 years ago, is today closer to about 50 cents. And that's about a 12-fold increase for firms. Next slide, please. This brings us to the impact of COVID-19 on firm digitalization. We often hear that COVID-19 has accelerated digital adoption, and that's definitely true in many sense. But the underlying picture is also much more complex than that. So, of course, COVID-19 has had both driving and conflicting factors when it comes to digital adoption for small firms. COVID has necessitated digital adoption as lockdowns were imposed across the world, and some estimates indicate that globally it has accelerated digitalization by about 3 to 4 years. But on the other hand, in Malaysia, businesses have been severely impacted by the pandemic and the lockdown measures imposed in 2020. As a result, many of these firms diverted time and funds away from deployment of new technologies into survival and cash flow. This means that they did increase digitalization of front-end processes, but they also slowed down or shelved completely the deployment of more complex, more advanced technology and processes like the Internet of Things and logistics digitalization. In other words, MSMEs digitalization amid COVID-19 was motivated more by a need to survive rather than a desire to innovate or become more productive. And additionally, because of the large revenue shocks experienced by many firms, many are now unable to meet the minimum annual revenue requirements for government programs. For instance, Selangor's digitalization grant requires a minimum annual sales turnover of about 100,000 ringgit, something that many firms can no longer afford. Next slide. A small section of this report is also devoted to the important issue of women and MSMEs. About half of Malaysians are women, but only some 17% of businesses are owned by women in 2018. While the proportion of women-owned MSMEs has gradually risen over the last 2 decades, overall Malaysia still has the lowest women business ownership rates in the Asia-Pacific region. These disparities between men and women business ownership rates reflect a wide range of intersecting social, economic, and cultural barriers and structural inequalities. According to the Mastercard Index of Women Entrepreneurs rankings, Malaysia ranks below other countries in the region in terms of women-friendly business conditions. In fact, we rank last among the major ASEAN economies in 2020. The 2020 Mastercard report indicates that Malaysia scores particularly low on women's advancement outcomes. This indicates a lack of representation of women from female business leaders to relatively low labor force participation rates for female workers. Of course, research in this area also points to the social, cultural, economic forces that persist. One study of women micro-entrepreneurs found that societal gender roles such as childcare and unpaid household work, combined with lack of access to childcare services, represented a major impediment to the business formation for women. Other research in the region suggests that social cultural norms that perceive business leadership roles as masculine means that what starts off as a woman-owned business eventually is taken over by a male member of the family when the business grows. And lastly, there's also the concept of a digital gender divide. Across the world, particularly in developing countries, this digital gender divide manifests in lower digital technology use, lower digital financial inclusion, and lower digital skills amongst women. In Malaysia, we have research to suggest that digital skills gaps are already present between male and female secondary school age pupils. So secondary school females, especially in the rural areas, already register lower digital skill levels in the internet, in the computer skills, in social and creative skills. Next slide, please. Next slide. So moving on to the final section, the final main section, digital payments. In Malaysia, e-payments, transaction volumes and values have been increasing steadily over the past decade. Bank Negara payment statistics indicate that from 2010 to 2020, e-payments transaction values about doubled and transaction values about quadrupled. Nonetheless, despite the growth, data for 2020 suggests that Malaysia's e-payment transaction falls short of BNM's target of 200 transactions per capita by 2020. That's the dark blue line. A target comparable to the transaction volumes of developed nations. So the latest data for 2020 shows that Malaysia has also missed other digital payment targets. This includes targets of 30 debit card transactions per capita. We're currently at 15, and 25 FPOS terminals per 1,000 inhabitants. We're at 23. Next slide, please. So the barriers to digital payments can be organized into 4 sections. These are regulatory and policy environment obstacles, infrastructure availability, consumer demand, and availability of products and services. And this includes regulations, financial inclusion, digital access, and ubiquity and reliability of digital payment systems. moving quickly now, the time is almost up. Some key obstacles. Stakeholders tell us that banking regulations and red tape continue to act as a barrier to new entrants in the digital payments and digital banking space. But more than that, on the financial inclusion front, there are still very large pockets of unbanked individuals and individuals lacking digital access in Malaysia. On the aggregate, financial inclusion data shows that more than 14% of adults still do not have any kind of account in a bank or e-money provider, and nearly 16% of the Malaysian population still do not use the internet, right? Which is about another 10% who do not have any kind of internet subscription. But beyond these issues, stakeholder engagement also suggests that demand-side barriers also involve the convenience and security of digital payments for consumers.
That legally card is enter lobby, enter new lobby, enter to the need to your certain floor.
I see. Then the car park is only to enter the car park lah.
Yes, most car park for enter car park.
Then Coco access card is also to get from the car park to the lift to go to lobby. Also use the access card lah.
Right. So beyond digital skills issues, demand-side barriers also involve the convenience and security of digital payments for consumers, and it includes the ubiquity of payment systems such as FPOS terminals. And we've seen earlier in Malaysia, the number of FPOS terminals per 1,000 inhabitants still lag far behind high-income countries like Singapore and Australia. Next slide. Now we move on to a quick summary of broad areas of policy for our digital future. So the first thing is border processes, right, on logistics. So the first thing is digitalizing customs border processes and moving towards paperless trade. So this will include re-engaging efforts with the discontinued EU customs and DFTZ application systems, and the government could look towards increasing the level of automation in customs processes. This will eliminate the need for physical documentation, increase efficiency, and reduce the time goods spent at border control. A digital system could also improve coordination between port authorities, customs agents, and freight forwarding agents, and reduce leakages in terms of bribery and corruption. Second thing, transport logistics. For logistics infrastructure, the government could support greater investment and deeper integration with particular focus on improving rail-based freight, which has been identified as the weakest link amongst Malaysia's transport nodes. This also needs to include higher infrastructure spending in general on rail, but also on improving road quality and safety by enforcing cargo limits and the digitalization of port services and infrastructure. And altogether, infrastructure investment would grow rail volumes, reduce dependency on road freight, and improve the performance of Malaysia's logistics. The other thing is on FTAs, right? So with a smaller domestic market and many of its neighbors, Malaysia is amongst the most export-dependent and open economies in the region. As such, deepening regional integration and pursuing and ratifying regional FTAs with strong digital rules could boost cross-border digital trade and improve digital connectivity by expanding market access, harmonizing e-commerce regulations, increasing trade facilitation, and enhancing economic cooperation. On the regional front, accelerating the implementation of the 2018 ASEAN Agreement on e-commerce will be a good start, along with the implementation of other existing initiatives like the ASEAN Single Window, ACTS, and APEC cross-border privacy rules. The government could also explore other avenues for integration like digital economy agreements with other countries, right? So a number of countries in the Asia Pacific have taken the approach of forging the next generation of FTAs in the form of digital economy agreements. And these agreements set common standards, outline commitments for digital collaboration, and support the growth of trade and digital trade between member countries. Next slide, please. Another aspect is federal-state relations. So there's a need to reduce duplication and fragmentation in digital programs through deeper coordination between federal and state ministries and agencies to boost the impacts and reach of programs and reduce information gaps and compliance barriers amongst MSMEs. While there has been increasing recent effort towards federal-state cooperation, a general lack of interagency coordination and cooperation leads to duplicated and fragmented initiatives, with state-level agencies running their own initiatives concurrently with programs at the federal level. And instead of complementing each other, they often produce overlaps in function and scope and create more confusion for small businesses. So federal policymakers could deepen collaboration with state agencies, particularly via working through the latter instead of just alongside them. This may mean allowing state agencies a greater role in implementing and managing shared digitalization programs. The next thing is related to consolidating digital programs and establishing a one-stop digitalization platform. For instance, through the planned MDEC Digital Enhancement Center, niche district or state. Consolidating the numerous individual digitalization grants, loan facilities, and initiatives, all of which have separate eligibility and application requirements to a single or a few flagship programs will reduce application and compliance burdens for smaller firms and increase effectiveness and reach. Next slide, please. With regards to gender-related issues, on digital policy, despite acknowledgement of digital gender gaps in the MyDigital Blueprint, the MyDigital Blueprint currently has 0 policy initiatives listed to address gender-related gaps in the digital economy. Establishing concrete and measurable targets would be a good first step in increasing accountability and enable evaluation. There's more on this in the full report. On labor market policy, gender-sensitive policies can work to reduce inequities and make it easier for women to start businesses and work. In Malaysia, this may include initiatives like investing in publicly funded universal paid leave family policies and increasing government spending and our subsidies to ensure universal access to childcare. On digital skills, we've heard earlier that digital gender gaps start way before adulthood. In fact, they start way before college and school, right? So providing more publicly funded capacity building initiatives like digital skills workshops and entrepreneurship programs in schools for women can reduce the digital gender gap and encourage women entrepreneurs. Lastly, on data, just quickly, in line with MyDigital Blueprint's target to review the PDPA by 2030, there is room to consider updating the PDPA with regards to principle, scope, rules, and enforcement of the law. Again, there's much more detail in the full report, but with that, that's all the slides I have today. Sincere thank you to everyone for your kind attention.
Before we proceed to our panel discussion, a gentle reminder for those who are joining us via Zoom, please mute your mic and turn off your video. Again, we would like to remind those who are joining us via Zoom, please mute your mic and turn off your video. Thank you. Now we would like to proceed with our panel discussion. We would like to invite our distinguished speakers, Mr. Fabian and Dr. Smita, and also our moderator, Mr. Alizan Mahadi, to take their seat on stage.
Thank you, Luis. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel session as part of the ICIS Google Digital Trade Report launch event. So in this session, we will aim to unpack a bit some of the challenges that were highlighted within the report, within Kevin's presentation, but also in general on the digital economy as well. But perhaps more importantly is to really understand what are the ways to address these challenges, what is the way forward within this session. Joining me today, I'm very humbled to be with two very distinguished panelists. We have Mr. Fabian Bigar, who is CEO of MyDigital, and Dr. Smita Kuriakos, who is a senior economist at the World Bank Group. Welcome, Mr. Fabian and Dr. Smita. Okay, I think Kevin has set the scene already for our panel session today. I think from his presentation, he touched on a few things. Some of them is firstly on digital trade and e-commerce generally. Apart from this report, a previous report by Google, Temasek and Bain and Company highlighted that this decade is seen as the roaring 20s for a digital decade, roaring 20s. We estimated that we are on our way in this region for 1 trillion gross merchandise value in terms by 2030. I think so. Generally, I think we all agree there is a huge amount of potential. There's a huge amount of opportunities that exist within the digital economy. But still, as Kevin presented earlier, there are still various challenges that pervade and then includes physical challenges in terms of infrastructure, in terms of digital infrastructure, in terms of logistics infrastructure, particularly more in the rural areas, but also in terms of in trade as well. In Malaysia, as Kevin highlighted, rank quite highly in terms of the restrictiveness index. In this context, it's not very good to be ranked highly, but these are some of the challenges that Malaysia faces in terms of the digital trade. So how can Malaysia address some of these challenges? Perhaps we can discuss about that later. Secondly, another focus area is the digitalization of micro, small, and medium enterprises, or as MSMEs. As I think everyone here knows, in Malaysia, MSMEs make up about more than 97% of businesses overall. While again, it's quite clear that opportunities exist, the reality is we're faced by many challenges. I think one of the startling things that Calvin showed just now was that overall 62% of businesses are just connected to the internet. And this is not, this is overall businesses. The figures for MSMEs would be much lower. And that is just connected to the internet. So further more advanced cutting-edge technologies such as big data analytics, such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, will be a big challenge, I think, for MSMEs. So again, we know there is a huge potential. There is a huge potential in terms of the shift towards 5G, but whether Malaysia can take advantage of these opportunities is a major question. So these are some of the things that we will discuss in the panel session later. Before I move to the panelists, let me just explain how our panel session will be conducted today. First, we'll have an interactive session between myself as the moderator with the panelists, and then we'll move to a Q&A session at the end of the panel session. For those that are tuning in via Zoom, please use the Q&A function as we go along, and we'll take as many questions as we can before we end the panel session. Okay, on the note, we'll start with the panel session, and maybe we can just start, first of all, to have your views on the report itself. I think it, once again, many challenges were raised, many policy recommendations were also raised. So just generally, first of all, perhaps, Mr. Fabian, if you can start by giving your comments and reflections on the report itself. Please, Mr. Fabian.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Senator for the release of the report. But all the things that you addressed in the report, I mean, you know, you hit on the nail on the head, or what is they call it, because these are also things that we discovered along the way when we look at the situation in Malaysia. For example, you know, MSMEs. You mentioned that there's a lot of agencies, a fragmented effort, and then duplication between the states and the federal government agencies in terms of whether it's initiatives or even the financial incentives. There's a list of double dipping and also wastage of resources. In fact, we realized that's why last year what we did was to start to help people navigate, because as you can see, the low uptake. When you look at Penjana, right, the special incentives for micro players, and they can reimburse to help them digitalize. Although funds are provided, but the uptake was very low, initially in the year. So we wanted to know the reasons. So what we did was, when we discovered, of course, a lot of agencies involved in this, and then sometimes businesses, they get confused. Who is doing what? So what we did last year was to gather all organizations together. We can't tell the organizations stop doing this, stop doing that. So what we did is gather them together, let them explain to the masses what they're doing individually. And we mapped out all this. In fact, it was a 3-day event, kick off live in Vera by the Prime Minister, then continue by a 2-day event. And this year we're going to do the same. Hopefully, with that knowledge, we publish it somewhere. We can help businesses navigate while we address the other issues. In terms of rules and regulations, I'll just talk about these two, maybe. Yes, the council, as you know, the Digital Economy and Fire Council is chaired by the Prime Minister. It meets every quarter. It has 70 members of council, both from the public and the private sector. And actually, the council commissioned a special, I would call it, working group on laws and regulation, not headed by government officers, headed by private sector. And they actually presented the findings. The 5 key needle movers are some regulations related to open data, PDPA, as was highlighted, even digital ID, how to speed up all these initiatives. So these have been undertaken by various government agencies and they have been monitored. And hopefully we'll see something sometime this year.
Thank you, Fabian. I think what's clear there is really addressing this fragmentation is a huge institutional undertaking. But also what's very important is the role of private sector as well. Because when we talk about digital economy, as we can see, there's still a low technology adoption rate, etc. So we really need to bring that conversation together as we move along. Okay, next I move to Dr. Smita. First, your early reflections on the report that was shared.
Thanks, Alizan. Can I be heard? Yeah. So first of all, I'd like to, again, congratulate ISIS and Google for this very, very timely and very informative report. In fact, it's very nicely complements the work that we are also undertaking in terms of this research together with MyDigital. And what I really liked about the paper is that it brings a very nice framework into a very complex issue. So it looks at the macro and breaks it down into what are the macro constraints, which are infrastructure, but then drilling it down to looking at what really matters for MSMEs in terms of being able to digitalize more, and what are some of the barriers for them to really reap the benefits of this increased digitalization. So some things that really do come out is the fact that while COVID has been a silver lining in the sense of increased digitalization, it brings to question the fact, is there going to be an increase in the digital divide if there is no speedy government action? So when I talk about digital divide, it's threefold. It is the regional digital divide, where we can see that there are some states that are lagging as opposed to others. There are the MSMEs versus the larger firms, and then there is the gender dimension. So having said that, I think the government has put in place a framework under the MyDigital Blueprint that brings together the main actors to look at a policy framework to cater to this particular divide, to make sure that people are not left behind. But really what is going to determine the success is the implementation of this policy framework. And that is where the fact that there is this, as Fabian also alluded to, and our study also is going to be showing, there's a lot of programs, and this was done with all good intentions. The fact is that the government wanted to help MSMEs, but only those that we could count. There were more than 100 programs across, 30 plus agencies. And then there are programs at the federal, and then there are programs at the state level. So that brings to bear the fact that what is really also important is coordination and centrality of some of these policies. And that I really like some of the recommendations put forth by the report in terms of using actually digitization in policy framework. So bringing together all these different programs under a one-stop digital center, which will also ease the implementation of these programs across these several agencies. Given that Malaysia is in a very fiscally constrained environment, this is also important because this will also mean there's an efficient use of these resources. And when you digitize these processes, there is also the fact that there is more information that is going to be shared across these agencies. You can then monitor and evaluate, and then that can lead to evidence-based policy making. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. You brought many important points there. Firstly, the idea of inclusiveness and especially the digital divide. I think, again, in Malaysia's overall development trajectory as well, this is a major, it has been actually a major policy agenda since the 1970s to reduce inequalities, etc. So when we talk about digitization and digital economy, we have to ask for whom, right? It should not benefit only the few. And again, in the statistics shown earlier by Calvin, it's quite obvious there is a digital divide that is already occurring, and this can only widen if we do not have the correct policy frameworks in place. Secondly, I think we're agreeing here. I mean, sometimes in panel sessions, it's also good to disagree, but I think we're agreeing on the importance of this coordination and having such a one-stop center, and also having a common vision as well, a common blueprint, if you like, for the digital economy. So on that note, I think we have the MyDigital Blueprint that is, of course, led by MyDigital. It's relatively new, maybe about 1 year. Can you explain a bit, Fabian, firstly, generally about the MyDigital Blueprint, but also what are the challenges in implementation so far? Maybe how do you see the challenges moving forward as well? And what are the achievements as of now? Are you optimistic that we can implement, as you say, all these policies rather than just have them on paper? So we can be a bit controversial about it, not either.
Okay. The blueprint actually was launched in 19 February last year, right? But its components are not all entirely new. It's a mix because, as you know, we started this journey towards digital nation since 1996 in the rollout of MSC. Then over the years, there were many blueprints, right? There were ICT strategy, public sector, and so forth. And there were various committees and bodies set up to oversee the blueprints. So in 2020, the government felt that it's getting more complicated. So let's put under one umbrella. Hence, you have the blueprint and you have one council that governs everything, right? But of course, the council is chaired by the Prime Minister, so you can't expect it to meet all the time. What we have under the council, there are 6 clusters that addresses 6 different areas that we are concerned with. Number one, of course, the public sector, digitalization of the public sector. You have society that address digital divide, and then you have emerging tech, mostly on letters. You have the economy, the trade, and so forth. And you also have talent. Look at fit for future talents, and of course, existing talents to pivot towards styles. So these are all governed. It's like a working group under the council. They make recommendations. They solve the issues. They also track the implementation under the various. So it's tracked at that tier, and then we are the second tier. Check the overall progress. There is a working mechanism. There's of course tracking and program management is not that, but it's being done by various agencies. Yes, challenges. During the launch, it's launched during height of the pandemic, so nothing is physical. It's done virtually. And for me, the greatest challenge is awareness. Okay? Awareness, because I just started, I'm very frank, with one in Sarawak, they have even ministries, as I said earlier. I just am meeting with the Ministry of Education. They are not aware what's MyDigital. Even the state government agency is not aware. Probably the state, central government agency may be aware, but the individual territories are not aware. So what more you say about public? So there is a need to actually, so this year, that's why we want to talk about MyDigital so that people impress and that also leads to the sense of urgency. In general, not only government officers, but in general, because as you can see from our IMD ranking in terms of individual companies, we are sliding everywhere. So for me, it's not because we're not saying we are bad, but people are moving faster than us. So the speed of execution is important to catch up with all this. So hence, for me, the challenges, I mean, if you ask me personally, awareness and then
Thank you. And as you can see, this is probably one of the fastest moving markets in the world. And again, the potential is significant. We've heard, again, 1 trillion by 2030, 35 billion in context of Malaysia. And therefore, if we do not move fast enough, we will lose the, I don't know if we can still say first mover advantage. I think there are many early adopters already, but, if we're sliding back, that is certainly very worrying. And hence, there's really a need for this conversation to be implemented. On that note, Dr. Smita, how about your views on, in general, not just MyDigital Blueprint, but digitalization policies in the context of Malaysia, your assessment of it?
One forefront in terms of policy. Before this, whole strategy, in fact, recognizing that SMEs are actually what needs to be done so that we can leverage on what we call industry 4.4, so that they not only keep that regularity, but also gain the market. So on that, and it's great that the digital blueprint and 4 other one house. So that really does help. And I'm thinking that Malaysia started digitalization way back in 1993. So it has a very strong footing. Now it's about keeping up with those who will actually put up and purpose Malaysia. So in terms of policies and programs, there are lots of them. It is about are they agile enough? Are they moving with the time? Are they being recalibrated? So I think that is where there is room for improvement, in that it is not the lack of programs. It is the lack of policymakers knowing how effective these programs are. So as I mentioned earlier, using data to be able to really see, are these programs really meeting the objectives that they were set out to do? Or is it something else that firms need? And then that is where there is a need for very close collaboration of, constant talking with the private sector, SME associations, to see what are some of these issues. It could just be the lack of awareness, as the paper rightly points out. A lot of MSMEs are just not aware of both the advantages or of the programs that can actually help them. So they're stuck in this trap of not being able to move up. So in sum, to say that Malaysia's policy framework is not lacking, it's the fact that it questions whether it is agile enough to move with the times that is required, especially now, given the fast pace of the digital economy.
Yes, a form of agile governance, I think, is the new normal that is required to be addressed. I think we'll touch on that a bit, but if I can follow up on that in terms of the delivery and in terms of the awareness. The report also touched on, is it, I think for both of you, is it a matter of the simple lack of awareness, or is it priorities, especially during COVID-19? Companies are just trying to survive, and therefore this might be a top priority. Did you have any thoughts on that?
When I mentioned, when we did the 3-day event, what followed was actually we actually asked them to fill up survey before they participate. And one of the things we discovered, in addition to maybe awareness, in addition to the know-how, it could be sometimes the how to say, the process of getting the funding is not friendly enough for them. I'll use a polite word, not friendly enough. Yeah, so they end up giving up. Yeah. So I mean, that's one of the things that I think should be another factor that we can look at. So, I mean, in short, that's the thing.
That's interesting because, again, this respect to agile governance, the processes are very important to be efficient in order to be agile. And I think Laureate Jit Banerjee, who does a lot of studies on looking actually at the processes at the local level to highlight that these are actually the major issues of lack of adoption. I don't know, that's Nita, do you have any thoughts on this?
So before COVID, it was both the lack of awareness, the fact that it was very cumbersome, and also the fact that some firms just didn't see this as a priority. Everything else was more important. Being digital is kind of a luxury. What happened with COVID, and when we've spoken to some of the micro firms, in order to survive, they needed to digitize. It was no longer a luxury. But then, as Calvin also shows, and we have the same that we see in our business pulse surveys, the kind of digitization is the minimal. It's just to be online, be customer facing, and that's it for for micro and small. The difference is stark when we compare them to medium and larger firms who are actually using digitalization to increase their efficiency, the production, supply chain, So this is not happening in the micro and the small. And that could be an area where policy could help. There could be programs that could be catered to raising awareness of why it is important to digitalize production supply chains and how to do it, because it's also, they don't know how to do it. So maybe gearing some of these programs, not just about, getting on the internet, but how do you actually digitalize your production process to increase efficiency and, as you said, increase innovation and productivity, which is really critical for Malaysia today.
Really, the coach is moving down the continuum in terms of not just being on internet, right? But on that note, Fabian, I think within the MyDigital Blueprint, I think there's a lot of indication of hand-holding. I think there is a target about 800,000 SMEs that you will handhold. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that? Because I think, as Dr. Smith has said, that there'll be a lot of handholding that needs to be done, it seems.
Yeah, in fact, the target, for MSMEs to actually go undertake e-commerce is that 875,000. And I think based on the report provided by MDEC, because it's under the MDEC roadmap, we are close to achieving that actually. I think we are in the 700s. I'm trying to look for the number here. We are close in shipping. But I do think that you must remember that those targets were set prior to COVID, right? So we may need to actually relook again and say, well, taking COVID into the equation, how do we revise those targets? Because we shouldn't be jumping around, being happy that we are close to the target. That is because it's propelled by COVID. A lot of things, not only that. For example, our target of 22.5% of GDP, that's 2025. We have achieved the target last year. So it's no reason for celebration, it's because of COVID.
On that note, if I can say this again, so how has digital policy changed because of the pandemic? Calvin earlier showed many times we talk about the positive effect in terms of digitization, in terms of the acceleration in terms of digitization, but at the same time, there are many challenges. There are constraints in terms of consumer spending. There were restrictions in movement in terms of challenges in terms of logistics, etc. How has the digital policy changed?
Okay, I can only talk about what comes under the digital because oh, sorry. Okay, I can only speak about what comes under the ambit of MyDigital. As you know, MyDigital is a 10-year blueprint. Within this 1 year, of course, in terms of policy changes, I would say it's very difficult to move those. But it's not impossible, But what's important now is not the policies of change. I mean, as far as MyDigital is concerned, the targets have changed. The timeline has been brought forward. Yeah, because a lot of policies is always towards gearing towards how do we become a digital nation, right? The leading one in the Southeast Asian region. But now it's becoming more and more urgent, and because of COVID, a lot of numbers have gone up. I mean, dramatically. So we may have to revise the target, or we even may have to move the timeline forward. Like for example, for the civil service, right? A lot of targets that were designed for 2025 were brought forward towards the end of this year. So they have to achieve those KPIs by the end of this year.
The message is clear here. The race is heating up, and also digitization is also a matter of survival for many. So we need to even accelerate the policy targets there. Okay, Dr. Smita, can we move to some of the issues in terms of this trade restrictions? Again, in the context of the report highlighted that Malaysia ranks, I think, 11th in the world in terms of the trade restrictiveness index. And this is due to a few issues, for example, some issues regarding competition, some issues regarding censorship, and so on. What is your take on this? Is it really a major issue that's affecting our growth in digital trade? And does it really affect SMEs and SMEs as well?
Thanks, Alizan. I think it's a broader issue, apart from the fact that it is. So what are the few things that has brought this indicator down, I guess, is the fact that there's a lack of competition in the telecom sector. There's data restrictions, and then there are import licenses. Now, if you look at it a little more broadly, the issue of competition comes in because if you have more competition, then you have, I guess, lower costs and greater coverage, and that in turn increases the access. So accessibility increases. So in a way, I would say yes, SMEs are losing out because those who are not in very accessible, where the infrastructure isn't great, they are definitely at a disadvantage. In terms of data restrictions, while Malaysia has this open data framework, what has happened is it's kind of not really being implemented uniformly. And some of the things that are alluded to in the study on the PDPA, I would go a little further, talking about cybersecurity. For example, there's been research to show that given the increase in digitization, it's the MSMEs that actually been attacked more. So what happens then is they're more vulnerable, which means that consumers are going to be more varied, which means that their access, the SME's access to markets decreases if there isn't a very conducive enabling environment that protects data as well as protects against cyber threats. So that is another deterrent for MSMEs from a regulatory perspective. So I mean, and other things are in terms of increasing costs, right? And talking about imports. So again, I guess MSMEs will be at a disadvantage because it will increase their relative cost. But I think more important is the fact that increased competition and increased data protection basically enables a more enabling environment that SMEs have a better chance and a more level playing field.
More indirectly, but just overall systemic issues that need to be addressed. In terms of the PDPA, is there any progress, of strengthening the PDPA to address this?
I heard there are amendments in here, but Fabian would be better placed.
I mean, from what we know, something will come up this year. There are elements to it, and I think it's within the realm of between the AGC and the government.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to go back to what Dr. Smita was saying, the importance of being agile governance, and I'm going to go back to the MyDigital Blueprint. Generally in terms of policy making, some people we still have our 5-year development plans.
Yes.
Some people say the world is moving so fast. Do we need kind of long-term plans?
Yeah.
How do we balance that with being agile and addressing things as they move rapidly? And I think as we've been speaking about this, within the digital economy, things are changing very rapidly. So how do you deal with this, changing trends that are moving very quickly, especially in this age of black swans with COVID-19 and so on?
Okay, thank you. Actually, the blueprint, of course, we know that it's a 10-year document, right? But why we plan it for 10 years? I mean, as in five-year plans and all that, you need to set the direction. We may be, from the very beginning, of course, we can never predict the future, but at least we set the direction. But as you can see, the blueprint actually is divided into three phases. So it's not something that is cast in stone that you can't change. In fact, I was talking to already Dr. Sumita that, this year is actually the last year of phase one, because phase one is the first 2 years. Now, there's something that we want to do, and re-evaluate back the blueprint at the end of phase one and now prepare for phase two. Do we need to change the trajectory for phase two, or do we need to change our initiatives, the strategies? So that has to be done, no doubt about it. Yeah.
So in a way, this idea of agile is already being built into it, rather than a kind of fixed, goal. Okay, Dr. Smita, again, let's talk about the increase in terms of technological adoption that is required. Can we use technology to leverage on increasing innovation amongst domestic nation firms, or again, are we a step back from that in the continuum? So do you think the technologies will help accelerate this technology adoption?
Certainly, digitization is going to become very critical because the way the world is moving, right? It is so. I find it sometimes hard to say digital economy because everything is digital now, right? So, given that, it is going to become a necessity and a skill for a firm to be as technologically savvy, as technologically innovative if it wants to gain markets and retain its markets, which also means that it's not just about technology, it's also about the skills. So something that increasingly comes up in all surveys, that firms are really, are struggling with getting the right skilled personnel. And that is why right now, it is also important to look at the future generations that are coming out of schools, and you start really at the early childhood education to make sure that these are people who come with cognitive skills and skills that they're able to apply, because there's nothing that's going to be constant anymore because technology is changing so fast, but have the basic framework and the skills to be able to use and be able to adapt to this changing technology. So what I think firms, in order to be productive, have to be innovative. And in order to be innovative, they will have to be both digitally savvy and have the skilled personnel to be able to use those and make them productive firms.
Again, that's the major challenge in the context of Malaysia and moving across the continuum to have the ability for innovation, technology, which requires also capital, access to finance, and so on. These are some of the challenges that were highlighted. Okay, I'd like to bring it back to this issue of inclusiveness. I do a lot of research on the ground, and many times when we talk about development, essentially internet is seen as as in par with electricity and water. I think in the MyDigital Blueprint, there is a mention of looking at internet as a basic utility. So can you elaborate a bit? What does this actually mean, and how would that change just by, is it just in terms of categorizing it as a basic utility, or what will the significance of that be?
To put it in simple terms, right? In layman terms, if you want to build a house in the past, the basic thing that you need to have is water, and electricity, right? In any housing development. Now the third element is now internet connectivity. So that's as simple as I can get. And it's already actually adopted in all the states in Malaysia. Yeah. Because we need the state to agree to that as well. So it was decided last year by the government, and then through MCMC, I think they have already talked to individual states, and we will inform that all the states in Malaysia has put it in their state.
That's good to hear. And again, I think the divide is huge here. There are some that are starting from just giving the access, and not just on internet, but I think in broadband speeds, etc. as well. But then there are some that require handholding more, moving towards the end of the continuum as well. Okay, Dr. Smita, we've heard a lot about the potential of the sector. We've heard, especially in terms of dollars, what is this sector, what is the digital economy in general worth. Now, can I have your views on in the context of Malaysia? What are the potential sectors that Malaysia should be looking into? I know we talk about e-commerce, but also there's a rise in health tech, education tech. Of course, in Malaysia, we know in the food industry to Grab, etc. Calvin also highlighted digital payments. Our finance sector is quite a major sector. So, what is your view on some of the sectors, potential sectors in the context of Malaysia?
Well, I think the beauty of digital is it transcends across sectors. So, of course, the financial or fintech is going to be very, very key. It's going to be, it's kind of like a driver for the rest of the economy, like the productive economy. And as what we've seen as far as COVID is concerned, I mean, health tech and ed tech are really going to boom. But having said that, I think Malaysia has a gold mine in the sense that it has an E&E sector, which was global leader. So how do you really capitalize on that, and how do you make sure that you kind of build on that, the comparative advantage that Malaysia has in that sector to build into clusters of excellence, wherein Malaysia can really, surpass both its regional as well as its global peers, with the fact that, it has to look at what are the comparative advantages as far as productive capacity, as well as what are the markets that it can gain, and where would it need to really focus on in terms of investments on the new technology, if it were to actually regain the strength in a new emerging sector. But I think it needs to build on the fact that it has this latent gold mine that you're sitting on, which is the success of the E&E sector.
Okay. So I think there are any thoughts on this in terms of maybe in terms of the MyDigital Blueprint? Is there a focus on specific sectors, or?
If you can see, there are four. Under the sectors, there are actually 10. So these are the so-called sectoral sectoral initiatives under, in the blueprint for each of these. So these are, it's more. I'm sure that the sectors that are relevant is more than that, but these are the 10 focus sectors, subsectors for services and the formal.
And if I can have one more question on that, so when you alluded to this, but being so cross-sectoral, we've already spoke about fragmentation, perhaps within the digital economy space. It must be a challenge to work across overall various sectors and various players across these sectors as well. Can you elaborate a bit?
Yeah, of course. Being a coordinator is never an easy job. Yeah. But if you look at the structure, we are not alone in the sense that it's not just MyDigital Corporation and all the various activities. How we do it is we go by clusters. So I work with the clusters effectively the clusters, it becomes a two-tiered kind of thing. And the clusters are the one monitoring the so-called special initiatives. Then we support the cluster and we actually, help them to build the so-called project management skills at the cluster levels. But I bet it's not it's not an easy task. The challenge is there, but I do see hope because as long as we monitor across and measure those movements of those initiatives, because I always believe if you don't measure anything, you will never improve, right? Like me, I have a KPI of reducing my weight, so I have to measure myself every day. Otherwise I lose track. I use a simple analogy like that. So I guess, and also adjustments, like back to my earlier comment about, having to adjust from time to time. It's like, you set the direction, next 10 years, I want to go to Antarctica, but along the way, things happen and you need to make cost adjustments. It's the same. Likewise, we engage with the various clusters from time to time to look at how they're doing and how can we support them. So this is the thing that we are constantly doing. But we don't have the luxury to run labs like how Pemandu used to do, long labs. We have now, because of COVID and all that, so it's basically online and you can do things online for so long.
There's also health tech applications now. So perhaps I'm thinking I need it as well. Okay, another, not a sector, but another theme that was really accelerating, similar to the economy before already the pandemic, but during pandemic is on sustainability as well. Dr. Smita, how do you see the merging of addressing the digital economy as well as sustainability as well, and these two trends, are they interlinked in addressing some of the core sustainable issues that are facing the world?
It's good timing that they're coming together at the same time, but it's also pretty interlinked in a way. If you're looking at sustainability in terms of just reducing trade costs, so digital would play a very big role. Having said that, now when you're looking at MSMEs will now need to be digital as well as now sustainable or green. So no better time than now to actually say, okay, how do we make policies that will actually help SMEs not only become digital, but also change their production processes such that they can cater to the needs of a green value chain, green system. Like close to 70% of Malaysian exports are with countries where they have made some commitment in terms of climate action, which means, and then there are lots of multinationals that have already changed the way they're doing business. They want it to be sourced from green and sustainable producers, which means that SMEs, especially in a country like Malaysia that is so open and trading so much, will need to then look and say, how do we change our production processes? So it's may as well do it all at once, and automate as well as become environmentally more conscious and have a more sustainable production process.
Yeah, I think the logistics and the traceability is going to become very important across the supply chain, and these are perhaps some opportunities that also exist. As you say, in Malaysia, we're a trading nation, and these are some of the global trends that Malaysia is faced with when we talk about trade, including digital trade. Okay, I'll go to some questions from, we've got a few questions online. I'll just read out some of the questions for now. I'll pick one first. The question is, I would like to ask, how will the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine affect the digital economic growth in Malaysia and the region? And, what can we do to minimize the negative impacts? Dr. Smita, would you like to attempt to answer that? Do you see any impacts on the ongoing conflict?
As with any trade, it basically we are in such an entwined global world. So any disruption in any part of the world will have some spillover effects. But having said that, I think what the last 2 years have shown Malaysia is that you need to be resilient to all these external shocks, because there were lots of other issues before COVID, and which really brings home the point that you really need to have a productive base. So in order to be able to be resilient to shocks, both climate, COVID, health, or other external shocks, and brings the fact that all of these efforts that Malaysian government is putting together becomes even more important to make sure that Malaysian firms are able to survive such shocks in the future.
I think COVID-19, one of the biggest lessons is the importance of building resilience, and having a productive base is one major way to build resilience in that. Okay, I have one question on how can MITI or Malaysia proceed to signing digital economy partnership agreements in the near future, and is there even a need to do so? Fabian?
Okay, I can say this only, from an external agency other than MITI. But what I know is I just had this conversation with some officers in MITI. They are seriously looking into it. But in fact, if you look at the blueprint, there's actually an initiative to actually have, what we call it, digital economy partnership agreements, signed between Malaysia and a few other countries. They have to initiate that work. And I'm sure, and I know that MITI is working very hard, because it's no longer about, we are so used to future agreements in terms of brick and mortar, physical things. But this has gone beyond that. So it's a new skill set, it's a new understanding that is needed, the implications and all that. So I believe MITI is engaging in various agencies as well, in coming out with our position. How do we go about this? And they're doing it.
Dr. Pinto, would you like to comment a bit on that? And just generally, maybe, is there a need to do so? What is the benefit of signing this trade agreement?
I think it's about increasing your market access, and goes back to increasing the opportunities for firms within Malaysia. So it is in the interest of Malaysian firms and Malaysian consumers that we have access, that these agreements give you access to a greater market. They also give you some kind of a framework to work within. There is more kind of conformity, and there's an increase in enforcement of some of these policies that are in place. But when you sign such agreements, it becomes more binding. So it helps both consumers and firms. Also gives you more certainty in a lot of these things.
I just dive a bit deeper in that. What is the challenge of agreeing to this agreement? Is it our regulatory environment? Is there many changes we have to do, for example, to the PDPA? What are the barriers to actually signing these agreements?
Okay, one is one is, of course, having to conform to certain standards. Yeah, for example, ESG. You may have an agreement that says, okay, when we invest in data centers in your country, you want it all from green energy. It could be that, Yeah, so whether are we going towards that, or are we capable of, meeting those kind of standards? We have to actually assess as well. Or do we have the will to go towards that? I think those are the things that we need to answer. That's why they have to consult the various agencies to say, hey, are we capable of meeting these targets?
In competition in certain sectors, opening up certain sectors that may not be as open, increasing enforcement of patents. So, so each of these agreements have conditions around them, and whether Malaysia is able to, adhere to those. But it's also a way to move towards what is considered, the global standard. And some of these agreements actually help to provide that impetus so that everybody works towards that.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question I presume is for Fabian. The question is, how does MyDigital track progress in the implementation of the various initiatives under the blueprint? Is there going to be publicly released data on the implementation and targets?
Okay. The short answer is yes. In fact, we are intending to release, I won't call it annual report because we start time. I will call it an interim report. That's something we are probably actually in the midst of. Our officers are not sitting because of this, but at least we are transparent about what are the achievements by the various clusters. Yeah? Of course, a full report I will expect it by the end of the year. When we give our evaluation, but at least to give a flavor of what has been achieved. Some of the numbers I mentioned earlier were actually from the drafts of those reports. So this is something that we are actually going to be transparent about.
Thank you, Fabian. By the way, if there's any questions from the floor as well, please do raise your hand, and we can also accept questions from the floor. So I get on to the next question from Zoom. The question is, could you speak a little on the role that blockchain technology or other decentralized financial services could potentially play in regards to democratizing supply chain financing for MSMEs? Dr. Smita, would you comment on this?
There are lots of banking sector also provide, and what that does is which then helps them. Started given the so in fact it's the SMEs. For really one of the constraints was they were not able to access traditional ways of financing because of the need for collateral. For example, in Malaysia, the advent of peer-to-peer lending has really increased access for MSMEs who didn't have access to traditional banks. So you've seen how digitalization has also increased the access to payments, to financing.
Would you like to continue? Okay. One area that we didn't touch on so much during the panel session, you mentioned a bit, Dr. Smita, on the gender divide in terms of digital. I mean, from what Calvin shared earlier, a lot of it is more, I suppose, a more systemic issue that doesn't stem from the digital economy itself, but to certain conventions, more cultural issues as well in many ways. But I suppose my question to both of you, from the digital economy, what can be done here to increase or reduce that gender gap within the digital economy? And perhaps Dr. Smita first, and then Fabian, if there are certain initiatives to address this specifically.
I think you alluded to the fact that a lot of these are systems. Basically, I would start with the education system. The fact that girls are leading self-space. We started. I see digitalization actually increasing some ways. For example, but and in the main for
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So then, from a MyDigital point of view, is there initiatives on this?
For example, so they actually was a bit under attack. It was reported that last year, 178,000 women entrepreneurs got the benefit, from the Go e-commerce onboarding and Shop Malaysia online program that is run by these agencies such as MDEC and so forth. So they are specific trackers that looks at not only gender, also in terms of age groups and also geographic differences.
Okay, we have a few more minutes left, but one major topic that we haven't really touched is on digital payments. In context of Malaysia, once again, we highlighted briefly, fintech is the major sector in the context of Malaysia. Can you just elaborate a bit more in the potential of digital payments in the context of Malaysia? Is this something that you feel is I think compared to some of the other areas, this is where Malaysia has seen quite a lot of progress. Is it something that will continue, or is it being saturated, or how do you see the digital payment?
In the 3 years that I've been here, I've seen a huge change, right? From when I came to Malaysia, it was all cash on delivery. And now I don't see any cash. So just to show, I mean, just to, in a matter of a few years, it is the fact that at that time consumers were not very comfortable and not being able to see or touch cash that leaves their hands. There's this whole perception that you won't feel safe. But to come to a stage now where cashless is the main way of doing business and to transact. So I think digital payments is something certainly that Malaysia has really made a lot of progress on. And even the stimulus packages, a lot of them were actually, transferred through online payment systems. So just to show that there is a huge kind of progress being made there. And I think there's just more to be done. Even also, the digital economy means there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are coming up with very innovative ideas. So I think this is not something that is going to be saturated so fast.
Then digital payment?
No, the trend of digital payment, and even post-COVID, I don't think it's going to slow down because people have got used to it. I mean, and all the systems are now, mostly catered for cases. Even in the government, right? There is this target of, having 80% by the end of this year, brought forward from 2025, and all of the federal agencies is reported now it's about 78% of the, all the transactions are now done via cashless options. I was told by Bank Negara actually the unaudited figures is even higher than that, about 91.6%, but that's across federal and state government. So I think it's gaining traction and it's moving forward. In fact, next Saturday we'll be in Kota Baru working with Bank Negara to look at this Pasar Sekitarja where it's totally cashless in the wet market. Yes. Do come to Kota Baru next Sunday. And Bank Negara is pushing for this.
I think these type of examples that can be catalytic projects that show that it can really be implemented. I think in many ways when we talk about digital economy, people think really of high tech locations, etc. And if you can do it in the white market, you can do it anywhere. Right?
I would say, Fabian, you need to publicize things like this more, because I think that's one of the things. Like the awareness of what is really happening. That needs to be really, because this is some really good things that are happening in Malaysia.
everybody needs to know. Did you want to?
No, I say it's going to be a big deal. But of course, we told Bank Negara it should not stop there. We should, replicate, and more of these so-called wet markets. Don't talk about the supermarkets or the department stores because they are already on top of that. Talk about the wet markets.
Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, I've just got one last question before we close this panel session, and it's really on what Calvin, the last segment there is on the policies for the future. We listed quite a lot, again, some related to more, as Smith said, the more infrastructure issues, some more in terms of reducing the trade restrictions, some more into inclusiveness. Now, perhaps for Dr. Smith and Fabian, you will have the last word on this in terms of policy, especially. So what keeps you up at night? Which one do you think, if you had to prioritize some of the policy actions, either those presented by Kevin or those that are, new policies, other policies as well, what would they be in order for Malaysia to move ahead in terms of the digital economy, in terms of digital trade? What are your thoughts, Dr. Smith, as your closing remarks?
This is a list of all very important policies. But given where Malaysia is today and the fact that it is at the cusp of a very important kind of decision to what to do next, with limited resources, I would say the issue of efficiency gains with public funding, and so that means reducing duplication, increasing coordination. And I really like the fact to use digital means to really increase this coordination between agencies and increase awareness of these programs for firms. That would be something that would be really critical, because when you automate and digitize, we also decrease inefficiencies, graft, any of those, and you can use that data then to inform future policy. So you really have something to look at when you're then going and doing agile policy. You can track these, you can make them public. So, what digital brings with it is the increase in efficiency and transparency, and in this kind of a situation, in an environment that we are today, that's what we need in terms of making the best of the limited resources.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Fabian, I'm sure all of these things do keep you up at night. What would be your
I would think, at a fundamental level, at a very basic level, the key so-called needle movers that we need to do fast, enable us to embrace this thing, and to participate with wider our global partners. Number one, digital ID, digital signature, cashless payment, your privacy and data protection. What we want to do with it. We need to have clear initiatives or clear policies surrounding this before we can move forward. So these are the basic things that we need to have to empower. Like for example, the digital identity. You need to do transactions, and people need to verify you. How do you make it easy and safe? Right? You need to have this. If we don't have clear so-called initiatives or clear results of what we are doing on this, we will never move forward.
Thank you, Fabian. And I think that wraps up the session very nicely. I won't try to sum up, but I think the broader kind of way forward is really, in my mind, what comes up really is agile governance. Digital economy, digitalization itself can improve governance, it can improve efficiency. And you're right, Dr. Smith, we are still in a very difficult situation that the pandemic has brought us. There are, fiscal constraints, and there's a real need to really be looking into efficiency gains at this moment in time. But there are also specific things, that we need to do, such as looking back into ID, etc. And these are things perhaps that are some of the quick wins. I don't know if it's a low-lying fruit or it's very difficult, but these are very specific recommendations that we can implement moving forward. With that, I would like to really thank you, Fabian, Dr. Smita, for your inputs today. I certainly learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone has. And once again, I thank all of you here today and also on Zoom for providing the thought-provoking questions. And once again, thank you to Google as well for really making this happen today. With that, I end the panel session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to all our panelists, Mr. Fabian, Dr. Smita, and our moderator, Mr. Alizan Mahadi, for the great discussion. This concludes our program today. We now would like to invite all our distinguished guests for the refreshments at the lobby area, and those who join us via Zoom. Thank you and see you again.